Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spoken Greats podcast. Today, we're going to be looking at visual intelligence by Amy Harmon and how we can use it to improve our observational skills. So, a little bit of context. Amy Harmon is a former lawyer and art historian who, for the past 20 years, has been teaching officers from law enforcement, intelligence analysts, military officials in how to improve their observational skills through using art in a course called The Art of Perception. But then the book goes on to talk about some of the wider implications for everyday people to use. You don't have to be a cop to benefit from improved observation skills. Anyone from being a social worker to a bartender can benefit from looking at things in a new perspective and communicating that effectively. Before we dive into the book, as always, I have a drink with me. Here I am drinking today an Atlantic dry mead from Kinsale Mead Company in Ireland. So as I give this a whiff, it's got quite a floral characteristic to this. And then you get like a little bit of honey hint on the end of it. But let's just give this a try, shall we? Cheers. So that is pretty darn sweet. It's almost got an elderflower hint to it. And there's a bit of orange. I just want to check the bottle again. I think it has been infused with, what does it say here? Floral and citrus flavors. Yeah, I'm definitely getting more orange. But yeah, the floral component is quite prominent. It feels like an elderflower, but nice enough. Please let me know what you'll be drinking in the comments today as we crack on with lessons from visual intelligence. So you may be wondering, how can you possibly have anything to gain from looking at art other than enjoyment? It is a wonderful thing in that it imitates life. And so if you think of it like a rehearsal for checking out the world as you see it, you can practice your observation skills. I know you could make the argument, we could just go to an airport and watch people, or we could go to a pub and observe people and try and work out what their job is, or is that couple on a first date? The problem with that is when you've made your deductions on the person and then they just walk away and you'll never know whether you were right or wrong. The brilliant thing with art is that you can check after. You can see what the work was titled, you can see what the intentions were of the artist, and you can see if your assumptions were correct. So it provides a training ground for practicing your observational skills. The other benefit to looking at art pieces is that we can distance ourselves from the material world. When we are looking at things in our own experience, we carry with that all our own biases, and that can lead us to make the wrong conclusions. When you're looking at art, you can be exposed to something totally wacky and unrelated to your life, which affords you the opportunity to look at it from a much more objective perspective. By studying artwork, you can find that there's often a lot of hidden details, and that's exactly the same thing in life. And those smaller details can make a big difference. You can describe what it is you're seeing and see how that reconciles with your expectations or assumptions, and see if you found something out of the ordinary. It's often these smaller details which turn out to be the most important to solving the problem set. In the Sherlock Holmes adventures, Holmes would often remark that the more unique or strange the case, the easier it was to solve because it actually had much more unique characteristics, which then limited the possibility. And he argued that the harder cases to solve were the ones which were much more normal and routine. If you imagine I was to say that I was attacked by a man last night, I've narrowed down the suspects to a few million. Whereas suddenly, if I am able to describe a peculiar accent from a certain region, his clothes, tattoos, piercings, the shape of his head, the hair, his build, his gait, all of these characteristics can suddenly narrow the search to a much smaller group of answers. Additionally, you need to establish what is the normal and what is abnormal. And then you can look for the presence of the abnormal and the absence of the normal. There's a particular famous case in the Sherlock Holmes mysteries of the curious case of the dog in the night, in that a racehorse goes missing and a dead body is found. Holmes notices that no one heard the guard dog barking during the night. That might seem like an inconsequential detail, but turns out to be a very important detail, because it means that whoever stole the horse was known to the guard dog. The guard dog recognized the person and then so didn't bark. And so by identifying what it is you would normally expect to see, you can develop better situational awareness. Does the person in front of you match the profile of someone you would typically expect in that area? Infamous example of this is in the 2017 Manchester arena bombings. The suicide bomber in question was a Libyan man in his mid-20s wearing tracksuits and a very heavy rucksack, walking around trying to avoid attention from people and alone. Not typically the profile you'd expect of people attending an Ariana Grande concert. You'd probably expect a lot of girls from ages 12 to 22, possibly accompanied by their parents in large groups, appearing quite excited for the concert, not likely to be carrying any heavy, large rucksacks or walking around alone. And establishing what you would expect to be normal in any given environment is important. Now that we've established that taking a note of the smaller details can be important and evaluating what it is that you'd expect to see from something, let's take a look at an image. So here we have a photograph. This is not a trick image. It's not one of those ink spot tests to see whether you can spot your trauma in it. It is a real photograph. And if you're only listening to the audio of this, I will try and describe it to you. But it is of some black spots in the top right corner with mainly white patches in the left side. You may have guessed what it is already. If not, I will show you the second image. So in the second image, when you increase the exposure, you should now be able to see the outline of a cow. And if you go back to the first image, you'll probably see a cow now as well. Now, well done if you were able to ascertain it was a cow immediately. Good for you. The point of this isn't to trick anybody out or to make anyone feel stupid for not seeing the cow. The point is that different people see different things. But once you are exposed to a different perspective, the way you see something will change. There's a great quote by Dr. Wayne Dyer. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So I'm going to show you another image now. So this is a painting by Giuseppe Arcimboldo. And so here we have what appears to be a metallic bowl with a variety of vegetables in the bowl. We've got some parsnips, we've got some onions, I think that's some turnips. I'm so terrible at describing vegetables. Okay, pretty boring, right? Why am I showing you this painting? Let's flip this image upside down. What do you see now? You see a face, don't you? So this painting is actually called the Vegetable Gardener. Literally a gardener made from vegetables. But until I flipped this image upside down, you likely didn't spot this. And this is the importance of seeing things from a different perspective. So it's important to consider looking at things from different angles, different perspectives. Also asking other people what it is that they see. Because what may seem obvious to one person, another person may not even have considered. There's the expression that a change in perspective can be worth 80 IQ points. We're going to take a look at another painting here. This is A Bar at the Folies Bergère by Edouard. Just take a good look at the image to see what you can see in this image. You see a woman in the center ground, a neutral expression on her face with plush red cheeks. She's wearing a necklace around her neck with what appears to be an amulet in the middle. She's got quite a low neckline. She's in a full corset dress with her forearms exposed. And on the right hand, there appears to be some sort of wristband. And her wrists are resting on the counter, which appears to be a marble counter, and various drinks on the top of the counter and a ball of fruit. And if you look to the right, there is a figure facing the opposite direction, which could be the back of the woman at the counter, which would mean that there is likely a mirror behind the lady in question. And you can see that there appears to be a man with a top hat and a mustache as well in the mirror. From this, we might be able to deduct that the lady here is a barmaid. She's working at a bar. Perhaps the man in the mirror is a customer. He's about to be served a drink. We may look at it. Are we looking at things from the perspective of the man? Or are we a third person who's out of frame? But we also see in the background is a variety of people sat in formal attire with top hats. There's a lady in the back with a white dress, which distinguishes her from the other more dark dresses in the area. But they appear to all be sat in rows as some sort of spectator event. So we have more clues here that there is a bar. There's some sort of spectator seating. So perhaps are we at a theatre or something like that. But then we have something in the top left corner. You may notice a pair of legs with two blue dancing shoes and a trapeze hanging from the feet. This tiny detail in the top left corner of the portrait reveals to us what the purpose of this whole scene is that everyone has come to see an acrobatic show, to see a trapeze artist. So the main reason that everyone in this painting is there is incredibly hard to detect. It's just a tiny corner of the painting, but that one small detail tells you everything about the context, about why everyone is there. And we are looking at it from the perspective of the ground level, looking at the bar. Imagine the different perspective that the trapeze artist would have of everyone in the audience. She'd likely see a lot of top hats and bonnets, and depending on the height or the lighting, she might find it very difficult to distinguish between people. It might be quite blurry. It might be quite hot from all the air rising from so many people crammed in one space. Compare that at the bar. It may smell of alcohol. There may have been some spilt liquor. You might hear music or chatter. All of these are points which can help you establish things of what is normal in a situation, or what would you expect to experience from a certain context. In 2015, a corporate executive and his family were tortured and murdered when someone broke into their house. And then the house was burnt down. When the detectives were evaluating the crime scene, they found a Domino's pizza box with some pizza crusts still inside the box. Now, to the detectives in question, it didn't seem to fit the profile of a $1 million net worth family to be ordering Domino's pizzas, especially when it was just one box, so it wouldn't have been enough for the whole family. So it just didn't fit the profile of what you would expect from this wealthy family. And when they ran the DNA forensics on the pizza crust, it turns out they found the saliva of the murderer, and the case was solved just through noticing a Domino's pizza box. In the mid-1970s, New York was terrorized by the Son of Sam killer, David Berkowitz, and police were struggling to identify who the killer was. They were running out of leads. Very few people had observed the killer. When one detective decided to look through parking tickets around the times of the crime. And what he found was that the same car was showing up at all of these murders. And he quite rightly came to the conclusion that it was the killer. Because it turns out that someone going on a shooting spree is unlikely to take the time to buy a parking ticket. So let's talk about the techniques laid out in visual intelligence. So Harmon uses what she calls the 4 A's. So that's assess, analyze, articulate, and adapt. In assess, you are saying what you see. And the more specificity you can use, the more likely it is that you will draw an accurate conclusion from it. If you imagine as if someone else had to draw a picture based on what you were saying, that gives you an indication of how granular you may wish to go. If we look at this painting here, we have 2 women. They're both wearing dresses. That doesn't tell us much, that doesn't differentiate. So let's go further into the detail. One woman on the right is sat down at a desk and is in a brightly yellow coloured frock, wearing a pearl necklace with what appears to be diamond earrings. Her hair is in a bun, which is also decorated. She's holding her fingers on the edge of her chin. At the desk, there appears to be a blue cloth covering the table, and the woman sat at the desk is holding a pen in her hand and appears to be a piece of paper underneath. The woman on the left is wearing a much more plain, dark brown dress. She's stood up, and looking at her forearms, you see there's a different coloration between the edges of her arms from the side of her arm closest to her elbow versus the forearm side closer to the wrist, which is more tanned. Whereas the woman in the yellow dress has completely pale arms. The woman stood up is holding a piece of paper with her arm slightly extended. So once you get into much more descriptive, it's a bit easier to infer what is the relationship between these 2 women. They appear to be of similar age, so it's unlikely that it's the relationship of mother or daughter. They appear to be in quite different dress. One is in rather expensive clothing and the other is in much more plain clothing. And the one in more expensive clothing is also sat down, whereas the one in more plain clothing is stood up. So that could indicate that the woman on the right is of a higher social economic status. Also, the fact that the woman on the left has different coloured tans on her arms suggests that she may spend more time working outside with her sleeves rolled up, compared with the person on the right spends most of her time indoors, which again gives us another indication that the person on the right is from a higher social economic status. And noticing that the woman on the right, she's holding her hands on her chin, which is typically perhaps an expression of surprise or thoughtfulness, but it gives us the indication that the woman on the left is giving a letter, or a piece of paper, I should say, to the woman on the right, rather than receiving it. And then once we actually look at the title of the painting, it's called Mistress and Maid. So we've talked a bit about the importance of small details. The difficulty is that no one can tell you what it is that you're looking for. It's not apparent which detail is the important one until you've looked at everything and considered their importance. It may well be that most of the stuff you look at is not important. You won't know that until you look close. So when we're assessing something, we can break it down using the Cobra method. So this consists of camouflage. Look at what might be hiding in plain sight, or what seems obvious but no one's bothered to mention. It could be the difference between this image is a photograph or this image is a painting. Next is object. So look at one object at a time. Our brains cannot focus on multiple things at the same time. This is when we will make generalizations and we won't notice the finer details. So focus on one thing at a time. And then the next step is B, to take a break. Go do something totally unrelated, 5-10 minutes, go for a walk, and then come back. And as you come back, you're going to use R, or realign. Realign your expectations of what you thought you saw with what you see now. And then A is ask. Ask someone else for their perspective on what they see, because it is possible that they see something that you don't, because they have a totally different perspective. So the next step is analyze. This is where you consider all of the things that you've observed and decide which of these is important to what you need to know. And she mentions the CIA's method for this, which is a simple 3-step formula of establish what it is that you know, what it is that you don't know, and if possible, if it was possible to find out, what would be useful to know. So here we have 2 images, one on the left of George Washington and the other on the right of Abraham Lincoln. So if you look at them closely and try and take in as much details as possible, and we would start with the most obvious and work our way down more nichely. So looking at what's hiding us in plain sight is that the image on the left is a painting and the image on the right is a photo. On the image on the left, George Washington is stood up with his right arm extended with his palm faced upwards, and he's in a slightly left-facing profile with his left leg facing to his left and his right leg facing to his right. In the left side of the painting, there is a wooden desk with a red cloth on the top, and it's draping over the side of the desk, and what appears to be a quill, an ink quill, on the desk. At the top of the painting, there appears to be a red drape hanging over a window, and there is a checkered flooring on the floor. George Washington is dressed in a long robe with what appears to be tights, and there is an armchair directly behind him, which is also made of wood and has several patterns of squares followed by decorative patterns. The top right hand corner, there appears to be a strip of several different colours resembling the colour spectrum. In the photo of Abraham Lincoln, Lincoln is sat in an armchair with his left elbow resting on a side table, a round side table. He is dressed in a three-piece suit with a bow tie, which is misshapen and leaning to the left-hand side. At his midsection, there is the chain of what appears to be a pocket watch extending from his suit. The body of Lincoln is only visible up to his knees. You can't see his feet. His right hand is resting on his leg and is holding his two hands together. His suit is creased at the left arm in 5 different places by the elbow. And from the profile of this perspective, only Abraham Lincoln's left ear is visible, his right ear is not. You can see sideburns going down his cheeks. His lips are together and there is a crease in his cheeks and his eyebrows are raised. So I've gone into an autistic level of detail here, and you may think, so what? Why have we gone into so much detail? What can we learn, if anything, from these? So let's go to the George Washington painting. And we noticed in the top right corner a strip of colours looking similar to the colour spectrum. Now, this is in fact a rainbow. Now, what does the presence of a rainbow in a George Washington painting tell us? Is it some connection with the LGBT movement? Is it some hidden society? It turns out that this painting was commissioned in 1796 in the final year of George Washington's presidency. And the rainbow is to symbolize that George Washington successfully guided the country through the storm of revolution and war before into a brighter future. And again, you might be thinking, so what? Of the 25,000 paintings of George Washington, there are only 3 which include this rainbow, and the painting that's on the screen at the minute is one of them. So just one element of information gives you the ability to filter down from 25,000 results to 3. So let's talk about the Silk Road for a minute. The Silk Road was an illegal website on the darknet, which was used to sell narcotics and other illegal services. And US law enforcement authorities spent years trying to take this website down, and they couldn't. And they were trying to find out who was behind it. And federal law enforcement agencies like the DEA and the FBI, they were looking at how to solve this problem from a cyber perspective. Maybe they could find a backdoor into the Silk Road and find out who's behind it that way. A special agent in the IRS, tax investigator, Gary Alford, looked at it from a different perspective. He imagined himself as the founder of Silk Road, and you assume that no one is born with the technical know-how on how to set up a drug marketplace on the dark web. So at some point, he must have learned how to do it. And so perhaps he's looked for advice somewhere or tried to find tutorials on how to set this thing up. And so Altman, just using Google, went back through old internet forums until he discovered a forum post promoting this Silk Road. Hey guys, check out this place where you can buy these narcotics, whatever. And then he followed that username to another forum post, which was asking for programming advice. And in that forum post, he left his details of Ross Ulbricht, the founder of Silk Road. So this is how law enforcement first identified and arrested who was behind Silk Road. Just a simple Google search after considering things from someone else's perspective. Another interesting habit about Gary Alford is that he reads everything 3 times. Now, this might seem like an obsessive habit, but this means that he didn't miss any important details, which, in the case of trying to find a needle in a haystack, of trying to find an important detail which could give you the solution to a criminal investigation, that could prove critical. And this is exactly the same reason why art students will go to a gallery and look at exactly the same painting for 3 hours. If you compare that to the average person, you probably spend about 10 seconds looking at a painting and then you move on. And when you notice how many people are taking photos on their phones in a gallery, how many of them are actually looking at the details of it versus just glancing? And so when you're forced to look at something for 3 hours, you start having to think differently. Your initial assumptions in the first few minutes are only going to keep you entertained for so long. And then after that, you need to fill the time somehow. And if you're actually going to be focused on the object, your mind will start to look at other angles, other alternatives, other perspectives. And this is how art can be thought-provoking, but we can be quite dismissive at the first appearance of something. And it's only when you take the time to look into the finer details that you find that you discover something new. So the next A is articulate. So this is where we need to communicate clearly to other people what it is that we see. We've talked a little bit about this already, about saying what you see, but this also involves removing any subjective language, because that is going to lead people to a conclusion which doesn't necessarily reflect what is objectively in the image. There is a difference between saying someone is angry versus saying they shouted. One is an objective fact, they shouted. The other is an inference, a conclusion that you have made. You have deducted that they are angry. But they might not be angry. They could be happy, they could be scared, agitated, but you have made that conclusion. But that is not objective reality, that is your subjective reality. Take a look at the image that you see now. What do we have? It appears to be a photograph. We have 2 individuals running in what appears to be a street or an urban setting. There's a wall with graffiti on it, with some of the plaster removed from the wall. There is a figure on the left in what appears to be a police uniform, commonly used in the UK. It looks like something from the period of the 1990s, but that would be an inference. He's in a black tunic, all black tunic, with a large traditional headgear of a British police officer. The man on the right is also running. He appears to be wearing jeans, trainers, and a denim shirt with a light jacket. Now, we can also note that the man on the left in uniform is white and the man on the right is black. Some looking at this photo initially, the first conclusion you may have come to was that it's a police officer chasing a criminal. And that's fine, as long as you acknowledge that it's impossible to know that from the photo, and you need to acknowledge that is a conclusion you have made based on what in the photo, which is your subjective perspective. We cannot know purely from this photo what is happening. We can make certain inferences, but if we were to report objectively, there's a white man in uniform running and a black man in casual wear running, we don't know that the police officer is chasing the other man. We don't know why they're running. And as it turns out, this photo is actually from a Metropolitan Police Service recruitment campaign. Because the man on the right is also a police officer. He's an undercover police officer, and both officers are in pursuit of a suspect. But your initial conclusions would not have taken you to that perspective. If you were to describe this image to someone else, you'd likely say that, oh, it's a police officer chasing a criminal down the street. But that would not objectively reflect what it is that you see in the image. That would rather refer your conclusions. So this is why it's important to articulate clearly what it is that you are seeing. If a social worker, for example, says that they went to visit a family and they saw the child was covered in bruises, that might push someone to the conclusion that the family is abusive and they should take the child into custody, versus saying there are 2 small bruises on both knees, a faint purple in colour with a slight graze next to each other. That might tell the person that the child probably just fell over, as opposed to being subject to physical abuse from their parents. And this is where the devil is in the detail. Failing to provide these objective facts of what you see and making a generalization is easier for conveying information, but it does not give the full picture. And so in order to articulate things more objectively, we have to avoid using subjective language. Phrases like obviously or clearly. Because things aren't always obvious, the world is often a lot more complex and things aren't that clear. Saying never or always, these are generalizations which are never really the case. It's statistically improbable. There's usually always, see what I did there, some kind of exception to a rule. Saying actually, if you're not convinced that someone is correct, try saying I don't believe instead, because actually makes it seem like you're very sure of yourself, whereas you may just be doubtful, and it gives a false impression of certainty. And it goes without saying. Again, this is an unhelpful phrase, because if something is important, then it goes with saying, and it's worth saying. So trying to eliminate these particular culprits is a great way for articulating yourself more clearly. And when you get into descriptives, don't say it's an old man, say it's a man over 60. Instead of saying big, say over 6 foot. It gives you an approximation which you can then objectively measure. Once you're able to articulate things more objectively, you'll be able to differentiate much more easily. Instead of saying dog, say German Shepherd. A really good example here of a painting by Monet. If you say what you see here, you may see that there's a bridge. You would say that appears to be some water lilies. And that's a pretty vague description. You've not articulated, is it a footbridge? Is it a suspension bridge? Can vehicles go over it? What colour are the water lilies? What colour is the bridge? Is there any kind of vegetation? And you may be thinking, so what? If we now look at these other paintings by Monet, how do you differentiate between these paintings? You have to look much more closely in order to figure that out. You need to look at the coloration along the rim of the bridge, or how overgrown the vegetation is. These are details which seem totally insignificant in the context of just looking at one painting, but when you're faced with 3, suddenly you need to be a lot more granular to make the difference. So articulate as clearly as possible and as objectively as possible what you see. Also, the order that you give this information is important too. You need to decide what is the most important information that you need to convey. Because you may not always have hours to analyze a problem and then convey your findings. There's a big difference between there's a dog in the road, slow down, and slow down, there's a dog in the road. Second one tells you the most important thing to do, which is the priority is slowing down the car. In the first example, you're telling the most important information last, which obviously creates a delay in the response time. Right now, it's not particularly important what it is that is in the road. The most important thing is that the car slows down. And so finally, we're on to the adapt stage, how to integrate what we've learned into our lives. How can we adapt looking at smaller details in our day-to-day lives? We're not all homicide detectives. How can this be useful? By looking at things through a different perspective, using the methods we've covered, you can improve your communication skills with other people, which helps in relationships and in work, because you will demonstrate greater awareness of how you perceive things, how the world perceives you, how your message will be received, and what it is that you want to convey. I think we'll leave that there for today. Thank you for listening to the Spoken Greats podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and hit the subscribe button. Be sure to check out my blog at spokengreats.com and look forward to future episodes with more great ideas from great books. See you soon.